Hello everyone. Today we are talking about auxiliary verbs, a very important topic in English grammar. Let's see what an auxiliary verb is. Look, auxiliary verb, the meaning of auxiliary means helping. So the auxiliary verbs we have in English, they help create tenses and functions. So as you might know, we have several tenses in English. To be precise, we have 12 tenses, past, present, future, and each one of them have four aspects: simple, continuous, perfect, and perfect continuous. So we use auxiliary verbs to create these tenses and also the functions. If you remember our lesson from modal verbs, if you don't, please go back and watch that video. When we were talking about modal verbs, I said that we use modal verbs to create functions. And modal verbs are one type of auxiliary verb. Look at these examples. She hasn't called me yet. Look, in every sentence in English, we have only one main verb, but we could have several verbs. So first, we need to find the main verb in each sentence. The main verb is the verb that involves the main action or the main state of the sentence. She hasn't called me yet. The main action in this sentence is call. So this is our main verb. So if you can find any other verbs, they are auxiliary verbs. So hasn't in here is auxiliary verbs. And why did we use hasn't or has in here? Because this is a present perfect sentence. So we are using the auxiliary verb has to create present perfect tense. Look at this. They don't sell shoes here. Again, sell is your main verb and don't is your auxiliary verb in here. And don't, we use do or don't in the negative form to create present simple tense in here in the negative form. The team won't play next week. Again, play is your main verb and won't is your auxiliary verb, which is also a modal verb. And won't, we use this auxiliary verb in the form of a modal verb to create the tense future simple. Let's talk about different types of auxiliary verbs. So we have four main groups of auxiliary verbs. The first group is do, does, and did. Look at this example before I explain the main point of this part. We say, do you exercise? So exercise is our main verb because it involves the main action of the sentence. So naturally, do is our auxiliary verb. A very important thing when we are talking about auxiliary verb is that what is the form of the main verb, or what is the form of the following verb when you have an auxiliary verb in the sentence. Actually, this categorizing auxiliary verb in four groups is based on the form of the following verbs. For example, look, whenever, no exception guys, no exception, whenever we have do, does, or did as our auxiliary verb in any sentence, the following verb, which sometimes mostly is the main verb, I'll tell you later, because sometimes we have several auxiliary verbs in one sentence, and we could have one up to three auxiliary verbs in every sentence. But in every sentence, we only have one main verb. Look at this sentence in here. So we found the main verb and we found the auxiliary verb. What is the form of main verb? It is in the base form. What is the meaning of base form? For example, you remove to from infinitive, it becomes the base form. To watch, the base form is watch, see, go, sit, talk, listen. These we call the base forms. It means we don't touch them. So that is why whenever you have do in a sentence, the main verb must be in the base form. Look at this one. She doesn't have a car. First, I told you, you need to find the main verb. And have, which involves the main state of the sentence, is our main verb. So, what is the form of our main verb? This is have. This is in base form. And there is a reason for that, because our auxiliary verb is does or doesn't, the negative form here. That is why we use base form. Look at this one. I didn't find anything. Find is your main verb, and didn't is your auxiliary verb. We use find in the base form. For example, we never say I didn't found it, or whatever other forms. We never say I didn't to find it. So the only possible form we have to use is the the base form for the main verb. There is something which could be confusing a little bit. Look at this example. I do yoga every day. Remember, this do in here is our main verb, and we don't have an auxiliary verb in this sentence. So whenever you see do, does, did, remember, they could be your main verb. You just need to pay a little bit attention to the sentence. The next group of auxiliary verbs are these: am, is, are, was, were, been, be, and being. I will explain it in a few minutes. Look, whenever you have one of these verbs as your auxiliary verb, there are two cases. Case one, if your sentence is an active sentence, the following verb or the main verb must be in ing form. Look, she's sleeping. What is the main verb? The main verb is asleep. What is the auxiliary verb? The auxiliary verb is, and this is an active sentence. So as you can see, the main verb is in ing form. Look at this one. I'll be waiting. What is the main verb? Again, the first thing you do is find the main verb. I'll be waiting. So this is our main verb. Now, what is our auxiliary verbs? We have two auxiliary verbs in here. Auxiliary 1 and auxiliary 2. And remember, every auxiliary, the form of every auxiliary is determined by the auxiliary verb before it. For example, we have two auxiliary verbs. The first auxiliary verb is will. Will is a modal verb. It is group 4. We'll get to it. And I have told you before, whenever we have a modal verb as our auxiliary verb, the following verb must always be in the base form. Like, for example, I can help you. Help is in base form because can is a modal verb. I'll be waiting. We have two auxiliary verbs. So the first one is will. The following verb is be, but be is not our main verb yet. It is still another auxiliary verb. But we use the base form because be is the base form of the verb be, to be. Because the first auxiliary verb is will, a modal verb, the following verb must be in base form. Now, the following verb is determined based on this, not this one. So, the following verb, what is the form of wait? Let's say we don't know. This auxiliary verb is be. It is one of these in this group, group 2. So it needs to be in ing form because our sentence is an active sentence. If you don't know exactly what is the difference between an active sentence and a passive sentence, we have a video. Look into our previous videos. We have a video on that, passive and active. And then you can watch it and come back to this. And let me tell you something. If it is passive, the main verb or the following verb must be in past participle form. Look, he's been fired. What is the main verb? The main verb is this one. What is the form of the main verb? The form of the main verb is past participle form. Look, the forms are infinitive, for example. Let me give you an example as the verb teach. Infinitive form is to teach. Base form is teach. Past form is taught. And past participle form is also taught. If you want to find out the past participle form or different forms of a verb, you could simply use a dictionary. My preferred dictionary is an Oxford dictionary. So this is our main verb, and we have two auxiliary verbs in here, this one and this one. The first auxiliary verb is has, because this is a present perfect sentence. This apostrophe s is not is, it is has. So because it is has, it is in group 3. We'll talk about it in a minute. The following verb, which is been, is another auxiliary verb. This is our auxiliary verb 2. Must be in in past participle form. Again, we'll talk about it in a minute. And our main verb is in past participle form again, because our the preceding auxiliary verb is one of these, and our sentence is a passive sentence. Okay, look at this one. This is a very interesting one, and there is a very interesting point in here. Look, we have another auxiliary verb in this group, which is being. Look, being is your auxiliary verb, but it is only used as an auxiliary verb in passive sentences. That's why, look, we say my car is, this is our auxiliary 1. Listen very carefully. Look, this is, we have two to-be verbs as auxiliary 1 and auxiliary 2. And our sentence is a passive sentence. The first auxiliary verb is followed by an ing form. Look, this is an exception as the rule I told you. Look, this is a passive sentence, but the following verb is not in past participle form, because we have being, which is an auxiliary verb we only use in passive sentences. So whenever your sentence is in this form, which is a passive present continuous, we use first the auxiliary verb is, am, is, are, or whatever else, one of those. And then the next one, the ing form of be, which is our next auxiliary verb. And because this auxiliary verb is only used in passive sentences, the following main verb must be in past participle form. Okay, the next group of auxiliary verbs are have, has, and had. The following verbs are always in past participle form. Look, she's lived here for 2 years. Again, the first thing you look for is the main verb. The main verb is lived in here. So this is she's lived. And sometimes, look, this is really interesting. Let's say we don't know if this is or has, because it is apostrophe s. We can tell by looking at the form of the following verb. If it is in past participle form, this is has. If it is in ing form, this is. So it is very easy to tell. Look, she's lived here for 2 years. We only have one auxiliary verb in here. This is in present perfect tense, and the following verb is in past participle form, lived. Look at this. He's been calling me. What is the main verb? The main verb is this. Now, how many auxiliary verbs do we have? We have one auxiliary verb and two auxiliary verbs. Again, the form of every verb is determined by the form or by the type of verb before it. Look, this is has because this is in present perfect continuous. This determines the form of this one. It is has, so the following auxiliary verb, again, the following verb is not necessarily always our main verb. It could be our second auxiliary verb. It could be our third auxiliary verb. I'll give you an example of 3 auxiliary verbs in a sentence in a minute. He's been. This is has, so the following verb must be in past participle form. Now, this is been, and this is an active sentence, so the following verb must be in ing form. Okay, so this determines the form of this, and this determines the form of this. Now look at this example here. She has lots of friends. What is the main verb? Yes. Again, you need to know when have or has or had is your main verb, because this is the only verb we have in the sentence. So this is not an auxiliary verb. Okay, the last group is group 4, which is modal verbs. If you don't know what modal verbs are or how many modal verbs we have, you could easily Google modal verbs in English, or you could go and watch our videos on modal verbs. I think we have 2 videos on modal verbs previously. So whenever you have, look, all modal verbs are auxiliary verbs. Modal verbs cannot be our main verb. You cannot use a modal verb without a main verb in a sentence. Try it. Like, I can talk to you. I will call you. You always have another verb, which is our main verb. We always use base form following modal verbs. Look, he'll speak with them. Again, first you find the main verb. The main verb is this one. What is the auxiliary verb? It is will, which is a modal verb in here. And we use the base form after modal verbs. Look at this example in here. They would have died. First, you need to find the main verb. This is our main verb. And so we have two other verbs. Therefore, they are our auxiliary verbs. This is auxiliary 1 and this is auxiliary 2. And this is pretty interesting. Look, we say they would. Would is a modal verb. So the form of the next verb must be in base form. Have. Have is in base form. And because have is also our auxiliary verb, it means the following verb, the form must be in past participle form, because our auxiliary verb is have in here, our next auxiliary verb. Look at this one, a sentence with 3 auxiliary verbs. Again, promote in here is our main verb, and will, have, and been, all of them are our auxiliary verbs. This is auxiliary 1, this is auxiliary 2, and this is auxiliary 3. And look, a very interesting point. Will is followed by have, and because will is a modal verb, the following verb must be in base form. So have is in base form, and have is our next auxiliary verb, and it determines the form of the following verb. The following verb is still another auxiliary verb, but it is be. What is the form of this? Because the preceding, the auxiliary verb that comes before it is have, is group 3. It doesn't matter which number. You know, I use group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4. You just need to know which form of verb follows which auxiliary verb. Have, been in here is in past participle form, because the auxiliary verb before it is one of have, has, or had. And then this is been. She will have been promoted. Our last auxiliary verb is a to be verb. So we need to find out if our sentence is a passive sentence or an active sentence. This is a passive been, we call it, because this is a passive sentence. She will have been promoted. This is a future perfect passive sentence. So promoted, our main verb, must be in past participle form, because been is our last auxiliary verb and our sentence is a passive sentence. Look here. You should be resting. Auxiliary 1, auxiliary 2, and main verb. Again, our first auxiliary verb is a modal verb, should. So the following verb must be in base form, be. The following verb, we don't know. We need to find out if the sentence is active or passive. And this is obviously an active sentence. So following be must be in the form of ing. The last point, before we finish our lesson, look, let's say we want to make this sentence negative. If you have several auxiliary verbs and you want to make the sentence negative, you add not to the first auxiliary verb. So she will have been promoted. The negative will be she won't have been promoted. We cannot say she will haven't or whatever else. So in here, this we change to won't to make the sentence negative. Okay, let's do some exercises together. Fill in the gap with the right form of the verb in parentheses. A. How would I about the situation? Again, what is the form? We need to use know as our main verb. First, to find out the form of this main verb, we need to look at the auxiliary verb. It is a modal verb, so this needs to be in base form. No. B. We will empty to find another way. Again, have, actually this verb in here is have to. That is the total verb, the complete verb. And because our auxiliary verb is a modal verb, this needs to be in base form. We will have to find another way. And remember, guys, have to is our verb in here, and this is not have. So this is have to. So this needs to be followed by a verb in base form. Have to works like sometimes we actually have to is another auxiliary verb, and it works like a modal verb, but it is not a modal verb. It means the following verb must be in base form whenever you have to. C. Has she the project? Our auxiliary verb is has, so this needs to be in past participle form, finished. D. That issue hasn't been something yet, and the main verb is discussed. This, our last auxiliary verb, is been, so we need to find out if the sentence is passive or active. This issue hasn't been, so this is obviously a passive been, so this needs to be in past participle form. This issue or that issue hasn't been discussed yet. E. I may have been something, a video game. Again, I may have been, we have been. We'll look at the sentence. This is an active sentence, and this needs to be in ing form because this is an active sentence and the main verb is following been. F. Have you ever something, anything useful online? Have you ever, our auxiliary verb before the main verb is have, so post must be in past participle form. G. You should have something to your doctor. Our main verb is listen, and we have two auxiliary verbs. The first auxiliary verb is should, and the next auxiliary verb is have. And this last auxiliary verb determines the form of the main verb. So this is have, this needs to be listened, past participle form. H. I was something to resign. Was is an auxiliary verb in here, and our sentence is a passive one. So I was forced to resign. Forced is in past participle form. I. Where would you be something to travel to? Will in here, remember, this will is our main verb. This is not a modal verb, guys. Look it up in a dictionary if you want to find out the meaning of will as a main verb, not as an auxiliary verb. So where would you be? Be is our last auxiliary verb, and this is an active sentence, so this needs to be in ing form. Where would you be willing to travel to? J. You'll have been, this is a sentence with three auxiliary verbs, and our main verb is work. So you'll have been there for 3 years by 2022. This is followed by, the main verb is following been, and been, because this is an active sentence, this needs to be in ing form. Next exercise, underline the right auxiliary verb in each sentence. 1. What have they been or being doing all this time? And because our main verb is do and it is in ing form, so being is an auxiliary verb we only use in passive sentences. And because our main verb is in ing form, so this is definitely an active sentence. So the answer is been. What have they been doing all this time? 2. What will or what have we will or we have contact you. We have two choices for our auxiliary verb, will or have. After will we use base form, contact, and after have we use past participle form, contacted. So this is contact, so this is obviously will, a modal verb. 3. Could she have or has killed the victim? We have two auxiliary verbs in here, and because our auxiliary verb 2 is following another auxiliary verb could, and this auxiliary verb is a modal verb, so this needs to be in base form. So have is the answer, and the following verb is in past participle form because it has been determined by this auxiliary verb. 4. Mary has or is reading an interesting book, because our main verb is in ing form, so definitely has cannot be our auxiliary verb, and is our auxiliary verb. Number 5. You must or you were be exhausted. Our main verb because exhausted in here is our adjective. Our main verb is be, because this is a state verb, not an action one. And were cannot be our auxiliary verb, because it is never followed by a base form. Must is a modal verb. It could be followed by a base form. Number 6, he should has or should have followed the instructions. Our first auxiliary verb is should. This is our second auxiliary verb, and this is our main verb. And because our first auxiliary verb is a modal verb, so the following verb, which is our second auxiliary verb, must be in base form. So have is the answer. And the following verb is in past participle form. Number 7, how did or have you learned English? First, we find our main verb, which is learn, and it is in base form, so did is the answer. Otherwise, we would have need to use past participle form. H, we are or we may be asked to show an ID. Our main verb is asked. Our last auxiliary verb is be, and this is obviously a passive be, because this is in past participle form. And this be is in base form, so it cannot be following are. It could only be following may as a modal verb.